The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as President Ibrahim Traoré surveyed the end of the paved road. His security detail fanned out nervously, scanning the unfamiliar terrain. What had begun as a routine inspection of infrastructure projects in northern Burkina Faso had taken an unexpected turn when the president had impulsively ordered a detour to see a rural electrification site, mentioned in a briefing. The lead car in the presidential convoy suddenly stopped when Ibrahim Traoré leaned forward to ask his driver why they had halted. The answer was surprising. "The road ends here, Mr. President," as Traoré stepped outside. The landscape before him would change everything he knew about his country. The Bisa region, home to 10,000 people per square kilometer, barely marked correctly on maps and unvisited by any head of state for 70 years. In that moment, accidentally discovering the most forgotten corner of his nation, Traoré encountered something he hadn't expected. A place entirely outside traditional development models. No one had anticipated that the road would simply end, transitioning abruptly from asphalt to a narrow dirt path winding between hills that weren't marked on their official maps. This caught Traoré's attention. 3 years into his presidency, he prided himself on his efforts to reach even the most remote communities. The idea that there were places in Burkina Faso so neglected they didn't appear correctly on government maps was disturbing. "How far are we from the nearest settlement?" Traoré asked, shielding his eyes from the sun. Colonel Nossi, his head of security, consulted his tablet, looking troubled. "According to our maps, there shouldn't be any significant settlements for another 60 kilometers. Mr. President, but the maps for this region are unreliable." Traoré's expression hardened. "Overlooked for 70 years. How is that possible?" "What do you mean?" "Unreliable," he pressed. Colonel Nkosi hesitated. "This is the Bisa region, sir. It's been administratively overlooked. The last comprehensive survey was conducted in the colonial era. Subsequent governments focused development elsewhere." Through this impromptu translator, Traoré learned that the man had come from Korsimoro, a settlement just beyond the hills that was home to nearly 50,000 people. This information startled the presidential entourage. Their maps showed nothing of the sort. Before Nkosi could respond, an elderly man appeared on the dirt path, leading a donkey laden with bundles. He stopped, clearly surprised to see the convoy of official vehicles after a moment's hesitation. He approached and offered a respectful greeting in a dialect that none of the presidential staff immediately recognized. Fortunately, one of the younger security officers stepped forward. "He speaks Bisa, sir. I understand some of it from my grandmother." "One people," Traoré repeated incredulously. "And how far is this place?" "About 2 hours walking, less than 1 hour by car, if you know the paths," came the translated reply. Traoré made a decision that would change the course of his presidency. "We're going to Korsimoro," he announced, ignoring the immediate protests from his security team about unplanned movements and risk assessments. "No," Traoré cut him off. "If this community has been waiting 70 years for proper recognition, they shouldn't wait another day. We'll proceed with caution, but we will proceed." "Sir," Colonel Nkosi began firmly. "At minimum, we need to send an advanced Team 2 with the elderly man as their guide." The convoy carefully navigated the narrow dirt paths, vehicles occasionally scraping against vegetation that encroached from both sides. Modern SUVs designed for urban streets and occasional off-road use struggled with terrain that had never been intended for automotive traffic. Their arrival created an immediate sensation. Children spotted the vehicles first, running alongside them with excited shouts. Adults emerged from dwellings and workshops, their expressions shifting from curiosity to disbelief as they recognized the national flag on the lead vehicle. As they crested a final hill, Korsimoro revealed itself, and the sight left the president speechless. Spread across a valley was not the small, primitive village he had expected. but a sprawling settlement with distinct neighborhoods, marketplaces, and what appeared to be an elaborate water management system of channels and reservoirs. How is this not on our maps? Ibrahim Traoré whispered more to himself than anyone else. By the time the convoy reached the central marketplace, hundreds of people had gathered. An elderly woman stepped forward, carrying herself with unmistakable authority. Through the translator, she introduced herself as Fatima Ouédraogo, the community's leader. "Welcome to Korsimoro, Mr. President," she said with quiet dignity. "We have waited many years for the government to remember we exist." There was no bitterness in her voice, just a simple statement of fact that struck Traoré more powerfully than any accusation could have. "Our greatest resource has always been ourselves," Fatima explained as they walked. "When help doesn't come from outside, you learn to find solutions within." Most surprisingly, Korsimoro had developed a circular economy system that minimized waste and maximized resource efficiency, not because of environmental ideology, but from the practical necessity of survival with limited external inputs. The next several hours were a revelation. Fatima led Traoré through the community, showing him innovations that had developed in isolation from government support or modern development programs. The water management system, he learned, had been refined over generations, allowing agricultural production even during drought years. Solar panels purchased through a community pooling system powered a local clinic, a cooperative education model ensured children received basic literacy and mathematics while still participating in essential community work. "Yes," Kabori acknowledged. "But look at their food security, their community cohesion, their resilience to external shocks." The last drought, government-developed regions needed emergency aid. Did Korsimoro? The tour continued. Traoré's economic advisor, Jean Kabor, who had accompanied him on the trip, whispered, "Sir, what they've accomplished here contradicts everything in our national development strategy. Their approach is bottom-up, not top-down. They've created resilience through independence, not through integration with the formal economy." Traoré nodded thoughtfully. "And yet they remain poor by conventional standards." Fatima, overhearing this exchange, answered directly. "We had difficulty, yes, but no one starved. We adapted. That is our way." As evening approached, the community organized an impromptu gathering. Seated with elders and community leaders, Traoré listened as they shared their history, challenges, and aspirations. They didn't ask for massive infrastructure projects or industrial development. Instead, their requests were modest but specific recognition of their traditional land rights, access to basic government services like official identification documents, and technical support to enhance their existing systems rather than replace them. "We don't want to be developed if it means losing what makes us strong," one elder explained. "But we do want to be respected and connected to our own nation." Late that night, unable to sleep, despite the comfortable accommodations the community had arranged, Traoré sat under the stars with his notebook. His mind was racing with implications that extended far beyond Korsimoro. How many other communities had been overlooked in the push for conventional development? What wisdom and solutions had been ignored because they didn't fit Western models that his government, like previous administrations, had uncritically adopted? By dawn, he had filled dozens of pages with notes and the outline of an idea that felt simultaneously radical and obvious. What if Burkina Faso's development strategy began by learning from communities like Korsimoro rather than imposing external models upon them? Over breakfast with Fatima and other community leaders, Traoré made an unprecedented proposal. "I want to establish a presidential commission on alternative development models," he explained. But unlike typical commissions staffed by foreign-educated experts, this one would be led by representatives from communities like yours, with technical advisors serving you, not directing you. "Document and analyze the systems you've developed here," Traoré replied. identify how government can support rather than supplant these approaches, and ultimately help reshape our national development strategy to build on indigenous wisdom rather than replace it. The community leaders exchanged glances, clearly surprised by this approach. And what would this commission do? Fatima asked carefully. After thoughtful discussion, the community agreed to participate. Before departing, Traoré made one final request. He asked to return, not with a presidential entourage, but as a learner who would stay for several weeks to understand Korsimoro systems firsthand. A president should know his country, he explained, not just from reports and brief visits, but from lived experience. The return to Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso's capital, was marked by a stark contrast between the vibrant resilience of Korsimoro and the familiar challenges of urban development. Traffic congestion, pollution, informal settlements, lacking basic services. Despite proximity to government offices and international aid organizations, with all due respect, Mr. President, said the Minister of Finance, international development partners and investors have clear expectations about economic governance and growth strategies. Experimenting with alternative approaches could jeopardize crucial relationships. In his first cabinet meeting after the trip, Traoré shocked his ministers by announcing a fundamental review of the national development strategy. "We've been asking the wrong questions," he told them. "We've asked how to bring development to rural communities when we should have been asking what those communities can teach us about sustainable and resilient development." The response was predictably mixed. Some ministers immediately grasped the potential paradigm shift and its implications. Others were skeptical, concerned about deviating from established development frameworks that secured international funding. A few were openly dismissive, suggesting the president had been charmed by rural simplicity, but was ignoring the complex realities of modern economic development. Traoré had anticipated this reaction. "I'm not suggesting we abandon all conventional development," he clarified. "I'm proposing we stop seeing traditional communities as problems to be fixed and start recognizing them as repositories of solutions. We need to learn from." Despite the mixed reception, Traoré moved forward with establishing the Commission on Indigenous Development Knowledge. True to his word, he appointed Fatima Ouédraogo as its chairperson, surrounding her with representatives from other overlooked communities and technical advisors, explicitly instructed to support rather than lead. 3 months later, Traoré made good on his promise to return to Korsimoro, not as a visiting dignitary, but as a participant observer. With minimal security and no media coverage, he spent 4 weeks living with a local family, working alongside community members in fields and workshops, and immersing himself in the governance systems that had evolved over generations. He witnessed firsthand how decisions were made through a process that balanced efficiency with inclusivity, how knowledge was preserved and transmitted across generations, and how social support systems ensured no one fell through the cracks despite the absence of formal safety nets. Most importantly, he came to understand that Korsimoro's relative poverty in monetary terms masked a wealth of social capital, practical knowledge, and resilience that more developed communities often lacked. During his stay, he maintained a detailed journal, not just for official purposes, but as a personal record of a profound learning experience. One evening, he wrote, "Western development models begin with the assumption of scarcity and individualism, each person competing for limited resources. Here, they begin with the assumption of sufficiency and collectivism, each person contributing to a system that sustains all. The question isn't whether one approach is right and the other wrong, but whether we've given ourselves permission to learn from both." Implementing this vision proved challenging. International development partners were skeptical, with some privately suggesting the president had been seduced by unrealistic romanticism about traditional lifestyles. Domestic elites who benefited from conventional development approaches saw the new direction as threatening their interests. When Traoré returned to the capital, he brought with him not just observations, but a transformative vision for a dual-track development approach. The conventional track would continue focused on urban centers and export-oriented sectors. But alongside it would be a new resilience track that would identify, support, and learn from indigenous development models. Most significantly, the bureaucratic inertia of government itself resisted a paradigm shift that implicitly critiqued decades of previous policy. For too long, he told the nation, "We have measured development by how much we resemble wealthy countries, rather than by how well we meet the needs of our own people with the resources we have." True development isn't about becoming something we're not. It's about becoming the best version of who we already are. Traoré responded by taking his case directly to the people. In a nationally televised address, he shared his experiences. In Korsimoro and other communities the Commission had identified, highlighting innovative solutions that had evolved without government support or international expertise. The speech resonated widely, especially in rural areas where communities saw themselves recognized in ways that previous development rhetoric had never achieved. Public support created political space for administrative reforms that might otherwise have been impossible. Over the following year, the Commission on Indigenous Development Knowledge documented sustainable practices, governance systems, and economic models from more than 30 previously overlooked communities across Burkina Faso. These weren't preserved as anthropological curiosities, but analyzed for principles and approaches that could inform national policy. The practical implementation began with pilot projects in 5 regions, each designed to demonstrate how government could support indigenous development models without supplanting them. In Korsimoro, this meant providing technical assistance to enhance the water management system rather than replacing it with a conventional dam project. In the western region of Benora, it meant formalizing traditional land management practices. Rather than imposing external ownership models, it's been trying to solve problems that these communities already have solutions for, he admitted during a cabinet meeting. Perhaps my ministry should focus more on learning and supporting, less on directing and changing. International reactions evolved from skepticism to cautious interest. Development economists began studying the Burkina Faso model as a potential alternative to conventional approaches that had shown limited success across much of Africa. A few forward-thinking donor agencies adjusted their funding criteria to accommodate projects aligned with indigenous development principles. Initial results were promising enough that even skeptical ministers began to reconsider their positions. The Minister of Agriculture, originally one of the most resistant to the new approach, became a convert after visiting a pilot project where traditional crop diversity strategies had proven more resilient to climate fluctuations than the monoculture approach his ministry had been promoting. Fatima, no longer just a community leader, but now recognized nationally and internationally for her wisdom, addressed the assembled dignitaries with characteristic directness. 18 months into the initiative, Traoré convened an unusual summit in Korsimoro itself, now connected to the national road network, but still maintaining its distinctive character. Leaders from across West Africa gathered not in a conference center, but in the community's traditional meeting space to discuss alternative development pathways. For generations, our knowledge was dismissed as backward. Our systems were seen as problems to be solved, not solutions to be learned from. Today marks a turning point, not because we have changed, but because you have begun to see with new eyes. The summit concluded with the Korsimoro Declaration, a commitment by participating nations to incorporate indigenous knowledge systems into their development strategies and to measure progress not just by conventional economic metrics, but by indicators of resilience, sustainability, and community well-being. Traoré addressed these challenges by consistently emphasizing that the goal wasn't to freeze traditional communities in time, but to create space for them to evolve on their own terms. True respect for indigenous knowledge doesn't mean treating it as a museum piece, he often said. It means recognizing it as a living, evolving wisdom that can adapt to new challenges while maintaining its core principles. As the initiative expanded, challenges inevitably emerged. Some communities were reluctant to share traditional knowledge after generations of having it devalued. Others had already lost critical elements of their indigenous systems and needed support to recover them. Questions arose about how to balance preservation with adaptation to contemporary realities. 3 years after his unexpected detour to Korsimoro, Traoré stood on a hillside overlooking the community, now the center of what international observers had begun calling the Burkina Faso development revolution. Beside him stood Fatima, who despite her new national role had remained rooted in her community. "Did you imagine this outcome when you first arrived here?" she asked him. Traoré smiled, not in the slightest. "I came accidentally, saw with limited understanding, and nearly missed the wisdom right in front of me." He gestured toward the valley, where traditional structures now stood alongside new additions. A community learning center, a health clinic that combined modern medicine with traditional healing practices, solar arrays that powered irrigation systems designed to complement the traditional water management infrastructure. And now I understand that development isn't a single path that every nation must follow. It's about finding your own path guided by your own wisdom and values. Fatima nodded. The question was never whether we needed to develop. It was always about who would define what development means for us. As they walked back toward the community, Traoré reflected on the metrics that conventional economics would still use to classify Korsimoro as underdeveloped. Per capita income, formal employment, infrastructure density. Yet by measures that mattered most directly to human welfare, food security, social cohesion, resilience to external shocks, sustainable resource management, Korsimoro now served as a model not just for Burkina Faso, but for communities around the world. The transformation hadn't been unidirectional. While Korsimoro had gained access to beneficial aspects of modern development, healthcare, education, connectivity, it had maintained the core systems and values that had sustained it through generations of neglect. And in the process, it had transformed national development policy in ways that would benefit communities throughout Burkina Faso. Most significantly, the relationship between the community and the state had fundamentally changed. No longer was Korsimoro a target for development interventions designed elsewhere. It was now a partner in defining what development should mean and how it should be measured. In his office in Ouédraogo, Traoré kept a simple map on his wall. Not the official government map that had once omitted Korsimoro entirely, but a hand-drawn representation created by community members that showed how they understood their place in the world. It served as a daily reminder that perspective matters, that official knowledge is often incomplete, and that wisdom can be found in the places most overlooked. The path of transformation that had begun with an accidental detour had become a new direction not just for Burkina Faso, but potentially for development thinking globally. It suggested that the future of sustainable development might not lie in increasingly sophisticated external interventions, but in rediscovering and supporting the resilience and wisdom that communities had developed over generations.